Today, let's talk about one of the great empires of the ancient world. At its peak, Assyria's rule stretched from the Nile to the Caspian Sea, and from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf. They are often remembered for their military might and a reputation for cruelty, whispered in tales of unimaginable power. Before Rome, before Persia, there was Assyria. They were a trailblazer in many ways, forging the very concept of a centrally administered empire from the fire, blood, and iron of Mesopotamia. For nearly 3 centuries, during the neo-Assyrian period, they were the dominant power of the known world, fielding a military machine that seemed unstoppable. This army was powered by a warrior culture that celebrated conquest. Their kings were not just rulers, they were high priests of the warlike god Assur, men who declared themselves king of the universe, and sought to prove it by crushing any who resisted. They built cities of staggering beauty and palaces so grand they were called palaces without rival. They created art of such exquisite detail that it still commands our attention today. Yet, history has given them a different name, a brutal empire, a regime that perfected terror as an instrument of government, and boasted of its atrocities in stone for all to see. The Assyrians are often remembered as history's great villains. An empire whose kings boasted of flaying enemies alive and building pyramids of skulls, perfecting terror as a tool of the state. However, this same empire was also a civilization of brilliant innovators. This same king who reveled in torture also created the world's first great library, a collection of knowledge so vast it contained the secrets of civilizations that came before. The Assyrians left behind a dark and complex legacy that challenges our understanding of the ancient world. They demonstrated that with enough power, an empire could be built on fear. But they also learned a brutal lesson: in the end, fear is never enough. The anatomy of terror. To understand the Assyrians is to first understand their doctrine of calculated frightfulness. This was not random violence. It was state policy, a carefully crafted campaign of psychological warfare designed to break the will of their enemies before the first arrow was fired. The Assyrian kings were masters of propaganda, and their preferred medium was terror. They didn't just defeat their enemies. They made horrifying examples of them, and they documented it all with chilling pride. The palace walls of their capitals at Nimrud, Khorsabad, and the legendary Nineveh were not adorned with serene landscapes. They were covered in immense, intricately carved stone reliefs that served as a public record of their brutality. These were not just art, they were a permanent showcase of what happened to those who resisted Assyrian might. One of the most infamous Assyrian kings, Ashurnasirpal II, who reigned in the 9th century BC, left behind inscriptions that detail his methods. After crushing a rebellion, he boasted, "I built a pillar over against his city gate, and I flayed all the chiefs who had rebelled, and I covered the pillar with their skins." He went on to describe, "Some I walled up within the pillar, some I impaled upon the pillar on stakes, and I cut off the limbs of the officers, the royal officers who had rebelled." His own words proclaim his identity as a trampler of all enemies, who hung their corpses on posts. These were not exaggerations for effect. The stone reliefs confirm these scenes. We see men impaled on sharp stakes outside their city walls, a punishment reserved for rebel leaders to serve as a slow, decaying warning. The Assyrians perfected this practice, understanding its profound psychological impact. Another favorite tactic was flaying, the skinning of a captive. The skins of rebel governors would sometimes be nailed to their own city walls, a grotesque declaration of the price of disloyalty. It was the ultimate humiliation, designed to communicate that the king's authority was absolute. These acts were part of a broader strategy of subjugation. When the Assyrians conquered a city, the punishment was meticulously recorded by scribes and carved into stone by artists. After the siege of Lachish in Judah in 701 BC, King Sennacherib was so proud of his victory that he dedicated an entire room in his palace without rival at Nineveh to depicting it. The reliefs show the city's inhabitants being impaled or begging for mercy. It was a clear message to every visitor: this is the fate of those who defy Assyria. Perhaps their most effective tool, however, was mass deportation. This was not merely enslavement, it was the erasure of identity. After conquering a region, The Assyrians would forcibly march tens of thousands of people across the empire. It's worth noting that while Assyrian kings claimed immense numbers in their inscriptions, Sennacherib, for example, claimed to have deported over 200,000 people from Babylonia. Modern historians view these figures as likely inflated for propaganda. Nonetheless, the deportations were highly organized state projects with three main goals. First, it was a form of psychological warfare. Second, it was a method of control. By uprooting and scattering societies, the Assyrians broke nationalist sentiments and kinship bonds, making rebellion nearly impossible. Third, it was a way to fuel the imperial economy. These deported peoples became a vast labor force used to build the grand Assyrian cities. The journey itself was a weapon. Reliefs depict families marching with their belongings, but also people in shackles, with hooks pierced through their lips, led like animals. It was a process designed to strip them of their dignity. This system of public torture, execution, and forced migration was the engine of the Assyrian Empire, a calculated and terrifyingly effective method of control. The rise of the Iron Empire. The Assyrian capacity for cruelty was matched by their genius for war. They revolutionized warfare, creating the most sophisticated and lethal military machine the world had yet seen. Their empire was forged over centuries, evolving from a city-state on the Tigris River into a continental superpower. The story begins in the city of Ashur, a trading hub in northern Mesopotamia. For a long time, Assyria was a secondary power, often overshadowed by neighbors like the Babylonians and Hittites. Their precarious position bred a resilient and warlike culture, where warfare was a necessity for survival. The turning point came in the 10th century BC with the start of the neo-Assyrian period. A series of ambitious kings began to harness Assyria's military potential. It was under Tiglath-Pileser III, who seized the throne in 745 BC, that Assyria transformed into a true empire. He was a visionary reformer who understood that to build a lasting empire, he needed a new kind of army and government. Before him, the Assyrian army was largely made up of conscripted farmers. Tiglath-Pileser changed this by creating the world's first professional, standing army. This year-round force was composed of core Assyrian troops and soldiers from conquered lands. This allowed Assyria to field massive armies, some reportedly over 100,000 men, and to wage war continuously. Technological innovation was the second pillar of their dominance. They were among the first to fully exploit the potential of iron, equipping their soldiers with iron swords, spears, and helmets, giving them a decisive advantage over armies still using bronze. They also perfected combined arms tactics. The core of the army was its infantry, primarily archers and spearmen. They were also pioneers in the use of true cavalry, soldiers fighting on horseback. Over time, they mastered riding and fighting simultaneously, creating a mobile strike force that could outmaneuver and pursue enemies with terrifying speed. However, the true genius of the Assyrian war machine was its siegecraft. In an age of fortified cities, successfully besieging a walled settlement was the key to conquest. The Assyrians turned it into a science. They were the first to have a dedicated corps of engineers and developed a stunning array of techniques to bring down walls. Their methods were relentless. First, they would surround a city to cut off supplies. Then, the assault would begin. Engineers would construct enormous earthen ramps to bring siege engines up to the walls. At the forefront were the battering rams, massive, multi-ton wooden machines, often covered in wet hides to protect against fire, with a heavy, iron-tipped head. Some were housed in wheeled towers that also carried archers, creating mobile fortresses. While rams hammered the walls, sappers would dig tunnels to collapse foundations from below. This multi-pronged approach was designed to overwhelm defenders. As King Sennacherib described his assault on a Judean city, he attacked by means of well-stamped earthen ramps, and by bringing up battering rams, with an attack by foot soldiers, using mines, breaches, and sapper work. This military-industrial complex was supported by an equally innovative administrative system. Tiglath-Pileser III reorganized the empire into smaller provinces ruled by loyal governors. He established a sophisticated communications network, a kind of Pony Express, ensuring that intelligence and orders could travel quickly. This combination of a professional army, advanced technology, brutal siegecraft, and efficient administration made Assyria unstoppable for a time. The Empire of Ideas. Beyond the terror and the battlefield lies the great paradox of Assyria. This empire of warriors was also an empire of scholars. The same civilization that perfected destruction was also obsessively dedicated to the preservation of knowledge. The transition from brutality to brilliance is jarring, but it is essential to understanding the Assyrian mind. They saw no contradiction between these two pursuits. For them, power was not just military might, it was also mastering the universe of ideas. The ultimate expression of this was the great royal library of Ashurbanipal. Ashurbanipal, who ruled in the 7th century BC, was the last great king of Assyria. He was as ruthless as his predecessors. His inscriptions boast of sacking cities and putting a captured king in a dog kennel. He led brutal campaigns, destroying the city of Susa and claiming, "I devastated the provinces of Elam, and on their lands I sowed salt," a phrase likely used as a metaphor for total desolation. And yet, this same man was a scholar. Uniquely among Mesopotamian kings, Ashurbanipal was literate and proud of it. He boasted that he could read complex texts from before the Great Flood and solve difficult mathematical problems. He was driven by a desire to collect all the wisdom of the ancient world. To this end, he created one of the most astonishing achievements of the ancient world. Located in his capital of Nineveh, the Library of Ashurbanipal was a systematic, state-sponsored effort to gather all the accumulated knowledge of Mesopotamia. He sent agents across the empire to find and copy every significant text. These tablets were then brought to Nineveh, where they were organized and catalogued. When archaeologists rediscovered the library in the mid-19th century, they unearthed around 25,000 clay tablets and fragments. The fire that destroyed Nineveh in 612 BC had baked the clay, preserving them. What they contained was a time capsule of a lost world. They found literary masterpieces, including the most complete version of the Epic of Gilgamesh, which contains a flood story with striking similarities to the one in the Book of Genesis. They found the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation myth. But the collection was far more than just literature. There were thousands of texts on divination. The Assyrians believed the will of the gods could be read in the stars, in the entrails of sacrificial animals, and in dreams. The library was filled with omen texts that listed every possible event and its corresponding meaning. To them, this was science. The library also contained intelligence reports from Ashurbanipal's sophisticated spy network, detailing enemy movements and political conspiracies. Knowledge was a tool of state security. There were also medical texts, mathematical tablets, historical chronicles, and bilingual dictionaries. It was a universal collection, a testament to a king who sought to conquer not just the world, but knowledge itself. This intellectual fervor was not limited to the library. The Assyrians were brilliant architects and engineers. Sennacherib transformed Nineveh into a magnificent metropolis with his palace without rival, and created elaborate parks irrigated by a complex system of canals and aqueducts. Then there is the art. The palace reliefs are masterpieces of narrative art, carved with incredible skill and dynamism. For the Assyrians, knowledge was power. Collecting omen texts was as vital to state security as building a new siege engine. The library was not a peaceful retreat, it was another tool in the imperial arsenal. Ashurbanipal, the scholar king, embodied this paradox. This duality is what makes the Assyrians more than just villains. It makes them one of history's most compelling civilizations. The fall of the House of Fear. Empires built on terror have a fundamental weakness. They create a world of enemies. For centuries, Assyria had systematically brutalized its neighbors, leaving a legacy of resentment and a desire for revenge. The very methods that forged their empire would become the architect of its downfall. The unraveling began after the death of Ashurbanipal around 627 BC. His reign, for all its brilliance, was marked by costly wars that drained the empire's resources. Following his death, a series of bitter succession disputes erupted, paralyzing the central government. The iron grip of Assyria was slipping. The first to seize the opportunity was Babylon. Under the leadership of a Chaldean chieftain named Nabopolassar, the Babylonians rose in rebellion in 626 BC. He established the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and the loss of Babylon, a vital economic and cultural center, was a devastating blow to Assyria. But the Babylonians were not alone. To the east, in modern-day Iran, a new power was rising, the Medes. United under their king, Cyaxares, the Medes had long been victims of Assyrian oppression. Seeing the Assyrians locked in a struggle with Babylon, Cyaxares formed a historic alliance with Nabopolassar. Their common cause was the complete destruction of the Assyrian Empire. For the first time, Assyria faced a coalition that was its equal. The hunter had become the hunted. The allied forces of the Babylonians and Medes began to systematically dismantle the Assyrian Empire. The final act began in 612 BC, when their combined armies marched on the heart of the empire, the capital city of Nineveh. Nineveh was the jewel of the Assyrian world, but it was also the symbolic center of their oppression. Its fall would be a moment of retribution. The siege of Nineveh lasted for 3 months. The fighting was brutal, a mirror image of the sieges the Assyrians had perfected. According to later chronicles, the final breakthrough may have been aided by the Tigris River, which flooded and undermined a section of the wall, allowing the besieging army to pour into the city. What followed was a storm of vengeance. The city was sacked, looted, and burned to the ground. The Babylonian Chronicle records its fate with stark finality. They turned the city into a ruin heap. Archaeologists have found unburied skeletons in the streets, evidence of the final slaughter. The grand palaces were torched, and the library of Ashurbanipal was buried in the rubble. The fall of Nineveh was the death blow. The remaining Assyrian forces held out for a few more years, but by 609 BC, the Assyrian state vanished from history. The destruction was so total that the memory of Assyria faded. 2 centuries later, when the Greek historian Xenophon marched past the ruins, he saw only a vast mound, with no idea of the capital that lay beneath. The empire collapsed not because it was weak, but because it was hated. The Assyrian legacy. The fall of Assyria was so absolute that for over 2,000 years, its name survived primarily as a byword for tyranny in the pages of the Old Testament. Nineveh became a symbol of hubris brought low, its very location lost to the world. But the legacy of Assyria did not die. It is a legacy that is dark, complex, and deeply influential. First, the Assyrians created a blueprint for empire. It's worth noting that the Akkadian Empire predates Assyria, but the Assyrians perfected a model of how to govern a vast, multi-ethnic state through a centralized bureaucracy. Their system of provincial governors, communication networks, and professional army were innovations that their successors studied. The Neo-Babylonian and Persian Achaemenid empires inherited and adapted this framework. While the Persians ruled with a lighter touch, they adopted administrative techniques, and their organization into satrapies can be seen as an evolution of the Assyrian provincial system. In a sense, the road to Rome began in Nineveh. Second, their cultural legacy, preserved by Ashurbanipal, is immeasurable. The library of Ashurbanipal was a bridge between the ancient Sumerian Babylonian civilizations and the later world. By collecting these texts, Ashurbanipal saved a vast repository of Mesopotamian science, literature, and religion. Their rediscovery in the 19th century opened a window into a lost world, revealing the deep historical roots of our own myths and stories, most notably the flood narrative in Gilgamesh. Finally, there is the legacy of fear itself. Assyria stands as a timeless cautionary tale about the nature of power. They perfected state-sponsored terror and demonstrated its effectiveness. But they also demonstrated its ultimate futility. The sheer scale of their cruelty ensured their fall would be just as spectacular as their rise. The story of Assyria forces us to confront a paradox. They were brutal conquerors who committed horrific atrocities, yet they were also brilliant innovators and the saviors of a priceless cultural heritage. Their legacy is a dark mirror held up to the idea of empire, revealing that genius and cruelty are not mutually exclusive. The ghosts of Assyria remind us that power built on fear alone is brittle. An empire that rules only through terror is an empire already digging its own grave. The hidden stories of history are full of these complex legacies. If you want to explore more empires that walk the line between brilliance and brutality, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more deep dives into the ancient world. Conclusion. So, was Assyria an empire of evil? They certainly earned the reputation. Their own words and art serve as a proud declaration of their mastery of cruelty. They built a system that ran on fear, and it made them the most powerful people on earth for a time. But their story is not just a litany of atrocities. It is the story of a civilization that, in its relentless pursuit of power, also achieved greatness. They were architects, artists, and scholars. The great irony is that their last great king, a man who reveled in the machinery of terror, ensured his own immortality not through conquest, but through the knowledge he saved. Their empire of fear crumbled to dust, but their empire of ideas, preserved in baked clay, endured.